Everybody is getting stoned. Everybody's using some form of drug. Alcohol, nicotine. Everybody is getting stoned. Everybody in the entire world is getting stoned something or other.
Yeah, really, honest. They really are. It used to be people thought, well, just the lower class or something like that, and it's not there at all.
Kids that have parents that drink, that want to be like their parents but still want to be cool, take Reds so they can act just like they're drunk, only they're not really drunk, you know. They have the status of being somebody that takes dope. They also have the identification with their parents to where they're acting drunk, you know, so they act like their parents.
It's easy to start on drugs. It's easy to stay on drugs, you know, until you start realizing that there's something happening, that you're not really there.
I find that I have to stay out of people that I know that are getting stoned and stoned on acid and people that are getting stoned on Reds, because when I see them on it, then I know that I want to get on it too, you know.
Before you start taking drugs, you should find out all about them. Read the newspapers and read books from school and all the books, you know, by the people that say that they're bad, you know, and that you'll turn into a heroin addict or something. And then go around and look at all the people that you know that take drugs and look exactly where they are, you know, like look at some of the people that you know that take drugs, you know.
If it's cool or not to keep taking drugs is something you got to figure out for yourself, because if your friends are taking a lot of drugs, then you feel that like you've got to take drugs because they are too, you know.
Mark Lindley is 20 years old. For 3 of his teenage years, he has been drug dependent. This is the story of the struggle which Mark and his family have had in their personal encounter with the youth drug problem.
The potential of dangerous drug taking and drug dependency should be looked at as nowadays probably the biggest test that the American family is going to have to survive in the adolescence of its children. It has become a moral problem, drug taking, with which everyone has to wrestle.
They got really messed
For anyone
up.
who is to talk to teenagers about drugs has to begin with the knowledge that drugs are very, very pleasurable. Anyone who opposes drugs must know that he's opposing a very strong adversary. Anyone who wants to offer something different from a drug experience must know that he has to offer something pretty powerful and real.
The drugs that I took them because I enjoyed them. We took a lot of LSD, and I took over 300 times. I saw dreams in my mind that I could see just as plain as if I was looking at you. You know, it was just beautiful. And I had lots of those. Lots of times I had just really powerful hallucinations that were just what I wanted, just exactly what I could get from drugs.
When I first had suspicions of Mark being on drugs, I was watching him quite closely because I knew he was around kids now that were known users. And so that began the long season of waiting up nights for him, wondering where he was, and watching his eyes. Every night when he'd come in, I would talk to him and get him into different positions, trying to watch his eyes to see how they were.
We caught him and his friends rolling marijuana, and actually visually seeing all this before our eyes and realizing what was going on right in our own backyard was a pretty difficult thing to behold.
Marijuana is one of the basic drugs that a person will take. I took it before I took any other drugs. When I took it, I often felt that I was just, you know, quite tranquilized and often more relaxing than anything else. A lot of the time I felt very distorted.
Time after time, in cases that I've seen, parents lack a real enjoyment of or appreciation of pleasure. The word for this in psychiatry is anhedonic, without pleasure. Not depressed or in pain or necessarily having a bad time, but just not experiencing any particular pleasure. I think that children see this. They see their parents working, being effective, having material things, and yet somehow without any particular sense of enjoyment. And they project this to the whole society and say the society is stagnant and doesn't offer them anything.
It's a searching situation where you try to see if there's something that possibly we have done as parents, something that maybe we brought it on, maybe we did something wrong.
The sense of failure that you feel, and how you feel that as a mother you've failed the whole family, and especially him.
There commonly is something that takes the parent away from the home and away from a sense of his own personal enjoyment or well-being. Most commonly, this turns out to be work. For many parents of these kids, the message seems to be that if you work hard enough and long enough, you won't really have to ask yourself painful questions about whether or not you're enjoying anything. One of my teenage patients coined the phrase work addiction, which describes this, I think.
Pills are one of the biggest things as far as druggers. The first pills that I took were Benzedrine, or bennies, whites. They're a stimulant. They also cause talkativeness, where everybody wants to talk. You want to talk a lot. The spats are Dexamyl. They're green and white capsules that cause the same effect. I took 50 or 60 of those the first time, in a period of 4 days, and I was strung out for a long time on those. And I took, to come down, I got some Phenobarbital, which is a barbiturate tranquilizer. It's a little white tablet. I took 15 of them, which was a way overdose. And I went to sleep at midnight on Friday night after being awake for 4.5 days and slept until Monday morning. Also, there was reds and yellows. Reds are Seconal. Yellows are Nembutal. They're both sleeping pills, and I mixed them with whites the first time I took a red. I took 2 reds and some whites, and I got a pretty good high on them. They were one of the talkative yet tranquilized, buzzing feeling that I felt like I could talk anybody into doing anything.
Mark's long hair was it was terrible. There's no other word for it. It was just terrible. It was very embarrassing to have to go somewhere with him, and I would have such mixed emotions. I would get so mad at people's attitudes toward him when they would be so vicious toward him, and the hate would be so apparent in their faces toward him. But at the same time, it made me so angry at him and so ashamed.
You constantly are getting help from all your friends that they wouldn't allow anybody that looked like that in their home.
I got really fantastic highs on LSD. I think that there was nothing that compared to it as far as ego trip. The whole shot, we'd become just overly powerful in our minds. We thought that we were ruling the whole world in our own small places.
These kids would always claim that they just couldn't explain the experience of being on drugs, and that there was just nothing else like it, and there was really nothing wrong with it. It was always this, that it's just a matter of time until it would be legalized. This is what they were always saying.
More frightening, I think, than all kinds of scare stories is that we will know what LSD does when the present generation of LSD users comes to autopsy. Because they're doing experiments on themselves, which, as scientists, we could never do to them. We wouldn't permit ourselves. And when we, look at their brains and examine their tissues microscopically, we'll know the outcome of these experiments.
When I first took Methadrine, I didn't really want to use a needle. The guy was at our apartment, and he said, well, I'll give it to you for free, just so you can try it. Later I found out that that's the way they get people hooked. I didn't, I'd heard of it, but I thought that was only for heroin. I didn't realize that methadone was the same way. They gave it to me, and I didn't know how to do it, so they showed me. They did it for me, tied my arm off and stuck it in my arm, and I never had such a flash in my life. I just all of a sudden was just overwhelmed with speed. All the air goes out of your lungs and your head tingles. I was always really afraid that the police would come and get me someday. We'd ride in a car and everybody was always stiff-necked and kind of, there's a policeman, watch out, keep it down and everything. I think we were so obvious that was one of the many reasons we got pulled over, because there was several times that they pulled us over for no reason other than we just looked like people that they should pull over. And I had to eat marijuana many times because of that, just because they were going to pull us over, and they did.
Well, I remember very well when Mark first came in my office. Written across his face was the fact that I hate everyone and everybody, and you're just another person that I'm going to rebel against. I don't care for you or any of your authority or whatever. All of a sudden he said he was grand probation and it was 3 years, and he walked out of the court and didn't know what to do. He wasn't really wanting to see any probation officer.
I had no communication with Mark from the time he was 10 or 11, 12 years old in that period. And as far as talking to him during any of this, it was impossible for me to talk to him.
We couldn't talk to each other at all. We didn't make it. We couldn't get a basic understanding. He was always watching exactly what I was doing and seeing things that, I didn't particularly want to see. He was telling me that I was going to die, that I was killing myself.
Mark's appearance began to change tremendously. His weakened condition was really apparent. He couldn't work, and his eyes seemed to sink further back into the eye sockets.
I couldn't really handle myself at home. I didn't have anything in common with the house or with the people in it. So I wouldn't stay. I'd go find somebody that I could feel at ease with, and that was usually somebody with a little bit of marijuana or something to ease the nothingness.
I talked to him and I told him, Mark, as long as you're alive, as long as you're here, you have a place in this home. This is your bed, and whenever you want to come into this home and sleep in this bed, it'll always be here, ready for you. And I don't really care if you only have 1 second of 1 year to give me in this home. I'm satisfied with that. And I took him and I held him in my arms, put my arm around him, and just sort of felt like I do right now in thinking about it. And that was it. I walked out of the room, and I think it was probably the first time, I'd touched him in maybe 2 years.
I'd take methadrine one night and then LSD the next night and smoke opium and hash and weed and DMT mixed with weed. And pretty soon I began to think that my mind was going. I was super paranoid. I couldn't talk to people.
I initially saw Mark in late October of 1967. He was 18 years old. His visit was preceded by a couple of panicky phone calls from his family. Mark himself came into the office barefooted, had walked for several miles along the beach on his way here. He'd walked from Hermosa Beach to here. He appeared dazed and confused and somewhat pathetic, and told me that while he was walking along the beach, he'd been thinking about the possibility of suicide. He never talked about suicide in terms of killing himself. He talked about it in terms of dying, ending, being destroyed, as if he didn't want to do the act, but he wanted death.
And he felt that he had nothing else left for him in life but just to lose himself in these drugs and end it.
Drugs are fun. Drugs are really fun when you're having fun, but after a while, when you take too many drugs, they don't get fun anymore, you know?
Yeah, there's certain things you can't do when you're stoned. You know, it's harder to relate to people.
You're paranoid of the police, you're paranoid of parents, you're paranoid of your friends. You just don't know what you're doing, and you just lose your head.
I mean, that's not fun. That's really not fun. And all the hassling to hustle, to get the dope and stuff like that, that's not a kick.
I don't want people to believe that drugs are more fun than anything else, you know, or the most fun.
Before people start taking drugs, they should really look into themselves for whatever the answer is that they're looking for with drugs. And it's hard. And you might not necessarily find an answer really quickly, but what you do find is going to last a lot longer than however high you get for a couple of hours or 8 hours or something like that.
Drugs must be combated with pleasurable experiences. As pleasurable and much more real and meaningful and permanent, and less guilt-provoking and destructive than drug use.
Last time I took drugs, I was sure then that it was my life on the line and that I was going to lose it if I didn't stop. And I really did realize that I needed God to help me. And then I prayed and I said, God, save me. I just knew that everything that I'd done was so totally wrong and that I was completely making an about face. And then I began just really living again, knowing that God is alive and is working in my life.
When he put down, and I'll use his lingo, he put down everything. And from that moment on, his life changed.
I saw Mark about 1 month later, and it was really remarkable. He came in the office. I anticipated the same angry, discontented individual, and he came to my office, and the first thing he did was act much more adult-like. He apologized. The first thing he did, Mr. Carr, I apologize for my behavior, for my attitude when I was here before, and it rather startled me because he said it in a very genuine, sincere way. I accepted his apology readily, really, and I told him I appreciated his apology and what he had to say, and he was complete reversal. It had nothing to do with what happened in the intervening time.
Once Mark had made the break, he saw very clearly that he would have to separate himself completely from his friends on drugs, and he took his Bible and he had it in his hands every waking moment for weeks and weeks. He didn't step foot out of the house at all without that Bible in his hand. He took it to work with him.
And I knew that I had to just go right into something really quickly or I would slip, go back into drugs. And so I went to work and I started building houses. My dad made arrangements to build some houses, and so I got onto that crew and I hauled lumber for them. But they let me nail, which, gave me added sense of confidence, because hauling lumber, you feel like, oh, wow, I'm just a laborer and I'll never be anything. But, I felt good because I could nail once in a while. In fact, one time he left me all day to do the work all alone, which, was something else, because I don't have that much confidence in myself to work, yet he did. I had to completely go away from all the people, the places that I was going to, and enter into a new life. And I knew that the life that I had to enter into was at the church. When I first went to that church, I was just really happy. I experienced love that I didn't know about. It was like a family living there. Everybody treated each other as either best friends or part of the family. And I felt that there wasn't any put on. I know that I can trust them and I can really love them, and they love me.
I think that group experience of a meaningful kind is the most specific solution to the problem. The problem is that most people, parents and teenagers too, feel very lonely. Nowadays, many or most families live as if they were surrounded by a moat, with a drawbridge. Any problems that they have, they've got to puzzle out and try to solve right there, with no help. And the presence of warmly interested adults, is very valuable both for parents and for children. And the reality of a group experience where there's real feeling and real sharing is almost a specific antidote to drugs.
Mark has made a real contribution to our college-age youth group over the past 2 years. Last year, he served as co-chairman of the group, and then this year, he served as vice chairman. And so during both of these years, he's been among the executive council and has worked very closely in making the group a success.
I think that your surroundings and your environment pretty much determine the way your personality is going to be. If you're in a low, dark cave someplace all your life, then you're going to be a cave dweller. And if you live in the light, then you're going to be a person that shines. And that's why I like to go to church.
I think it's very difficult for straight kids, kids who have not been involved with drugs, to quite understand the needs of another teenager who has suffered as much as Mark had suffered. And these teenagers in this church just literally enveloped Mark and walked with him, and their love made it possible for him to find a place to which he belonged and to find the security that he needed.
And I don't know anybody that I love more than the kids in that choir. I know that I can trust them and I can really love them.
When he was taking drugs, he wasn't really facing life and living. But the days afterwards, he had to live through depressions. He had to live through temptations, disappointments particularly in himself. He thought perhaps he could do things that he'd always wanted to do just because he had stopped taking drugs. But it took a long time of healing.
I would want to maybe run and jump off a cliff if I didn't have the Lord to go to it, because of some of the things that I'm involved in with people and stuff, where things just seem so hopeless that without the Lord I would never want to even go on living. And I even feel like I don't sometimes anyway, but I always am able to turn to the Lord. And I know that that's really what has helped me through many, many days of emotional hang-ups and just plain people hang-ups.
Mark enrolled in our Torrance High School on February 20th of 1969. He had received only 105 credits in 3 years of high school, where normally a boy would receive approximately 180 credits during that period of time. He does have to complete with us U.S. history, second semester, and U.S. government 2 semesters, plus he is taking English with us right now.
Does this thing have all of
your grades in high school in the Palos Verdes Unified District? After enrolling with us, we have noticed real progress in Mark. His attendance has been good. He's doing very well. I can anticipate Mark graduating from the Torrance High School next year at age 21.
I had Mark Lindley when he was a freshman at Rolling Hills High School here, and we feel that no one on the coaching staff felt that Mark had great potential as an athlete, as a football player. He was big and strong and had good mobility. And at the end of the season, we had a lot of great prospects, and looking forward to him in the future. And we really feel that Mark could have been college material.
I used to fight with my brother, and we never got along. In fact, while I was taking drugs, he didn't want to be with me or know me, and treated me with an attitude of fear. And I spent quite a bit of time, since then, being with him, and the basic thing that's happened is we love each other, and we don't have any hang-ups. We're not worst enemies now. My sister and I, even while I was taking drugs, we got along, but she was afraid of me then. Now she treats me as an equal, as her brother, and she's my sister, and we don't really have any trouble anymore.
Lynette never gave up praying for him. She never gave up the fact that God was going to answer her prayers. They get along really fine now. They have a real good time together.
to be blessed with a son first was a real blessing. But I think to see Mark after all of this and to see him come back was even a greater blessing. And to have him now, to have him working with me, and both of my boys, to have them available and to watch them in this stage of life is a great thing. Our communications have increased. It's a different relationship now.
He's a contractor and I'm a carpenter. We talk about our business and investing in what we're doing and stuff, and it's becoming really a good relationship. We've had a few good talks. Like one time just recently I was really upset about my girlfriend, and he talked to me and he told me things that I didn't know a dad would know. We have fun. We enjoy being with each other. We crack jokes about each other, laugh at each other, and our general attitude towards each other is pretty light. And we have our serious moments, but we also have a lot of fun.
I think that the aspect of themselves that parents have to examine very carefully is the amount of enjoyment they have in their own lives. Do they experience anything that really represents a meaningful substitute for drugs?
Mark is one of the very few drug users who have put down. And despite the fact that he's remained off drugs for more than 2 years, Mark still finds life a constant struggle.
If I try to think of what's going to happen tomorrow or the next week and try to live it in my mind before it happens, I usually end up out on a limb and sawing it off behind me is what I can describe it as. If you always spend your time thinking of the future, you're going to start bumping into walls pretty soon, because, today is where you have to keep your eyes on. The only thing that has really brought me through all this and to where I am today is Jesus Christ, because he is life and the light, and without him there's darkness, and I would prefer to live in the light.